The ride up to the elevator shaft was quiet and relieving at the same time. Since meeting Jack earlier that night, she never planned to get any more personal than surviving. Things were different now, and they weren't just strangers in a horrible situation. Now she wasn't sure where they were. Friends, acquaintances, something more maybe? She didn't know if there was anything she learned over the past couple of hours, it would change in an instant. She had never felt so out of control in her own life before this. I guess being trapped in a zombie-infested city would do that to a person. She stopped in the hallway behind Chief's office and crossed her arms to her stomach. Jack stopped at the doorframe, looking back at her. She seemed to be apprehensive at his words. "You okay? Just give me a moment," she said. Despite how he acted up in the past till now, Jack nodded, silently, and wandered into the office without her. He kept his Springfield drawn at the side to his left. Claire sank against the wall next to her, attempting to clear her thoughts of her traumatizing encounter with Irons. For a moment her mind sank to what ifs. What if Irons had been a little faster in pulling her into the elevator? What if he had worked himself on top of her with that silver knife in his torture dungeon? What if Jack hadn't been there on time? Seriously, don't stop and let it yourself down with what ifs. Nothing matters. All that matters is that he came back. Quit dancing around it. He cares about you, so it's crazy to accept someone who may care. Claire then shook her head as she wiped through a single tear from her right eye. It was then Claire decided, unequivocally, that they were going to make it out of here or dying together. There was no escaping alone. No doubt in her mind if one of them would fall and the other would carry them. If any of them became infected, the other would take care of it. One of them was lost, and then no other one would come and find them. Despite for their rough beginnings, Jack had grown on her. She wondered if there was something more than friendship here. However, was not sure that time to be wonder. She was just attacked, and emotions were high. She just needed time to sort her feelings. With a deep breath, she continued down the hall and exited Iron's office. Jack was standing behind Iron's heavy oak door desk in the corner, shuffling through the papers. His eyes fell on her as she crossed into the room. Her mind snapped back into the reality of their situation. "Look, I'm sorry, Jack cut her off suddenly. "It's okay. We could talk about everything later, when we get out of here." He smiled a warm smile at her. His smile was oddly comforting. However, it was just what she needed. "I found your stuff locked away in the gun cabinet in the corner." Jack motioned to her for a cabinet across near the exit door. Claire felt her eyes roll with the irony of weapons being less than 3 steps behind her, and after waking up in Iron's office, she could have been divided over the couch, removed her handgun from her holster into the cabinet, blown him away before he made it halfway across the room. Claire couldn't get in the holster back on fast enough. As she strapped her crossbow back, slung the grenade launcher over her head, Jack spoke up from the chief's desk. "Holy shit!" he yelled. Claire raised an eyebrow. "What?" Jack pulled a long silver revolver from the desk and let the weapon drop. It thudded like a brick head against a heavy oak. The barrel was 6 inches long and had a black rubber grip on the butt. "Holy shit, this is right," she said with a smile on her face. "S&W 500 Magnum," Jack said quietly. "It's a hunter's dream sidearm. Should take out any huntable animal in the wilderness. Carries 5 large rounds. Would stop a bear dead and with a decent place shot." Jack removed the sling holster from his desk. "It's heavy as hell, but it should stop any living thing from our path." Claire brought her index finger and the middle fingers to her lips. Jack looked over at her questionably. "We're ready carrying so much weight, though." Jack nodded. "True. I'm full between the M4 sidearm and the Desert Eagle." "We'd be so stupid to leave this here," Claire muttered. Jack had picked it up by the butt and lowered the muzzle downward where he hit the release lever and let the cylinder fall outwards. 5 long brass bullets reflected at him. "It's full." Claire nodded. The Browning was her to-go weapon for handling random zombies across the hallways. The grenade launcher was great for anything bigger, but it carried a lot of risks each time she fired it. Her crossbow, however, was getting harder and harder to justify. The bolts themselves weren't the most effective against the walking dead, unless you hit them in the head. On top of that, it was heavy for what it was, and the bolts were bulky. Not to mention how much her back was killing her for trying to carry 2 weapons on her back. The revolver glistened back at her, and the thought of her weapon that could handle any abomination that would come close with some was attractive. "What do you think our friend Mr. X will think about this thing?" Claire smiled at him. "My thoughts exactly." Without a thought, Claire relieved her back and dropped the burning crossbow into the chief's desk. She clipped the sling onto the large revolving holster and tightened it to her torso. The strap of the sling hugged her red vest tight to her chest, and she adjusted the holster for 500. Claire slipped on the 500 into the holster. Jack watched her with wide eyes. "Ever shot with anything like that before?" "Just try to keep up," she said. "Come on, let's get out of here." Jack followed Claire out of the chief's office. For the final time, they left the musty, plush, carpeted room behind them. Jack was surprised by their growing knowledge of the police station's layout. They took their path downward, passing the break room, leading to the basement. The small smell of rotting flesh and faint gunpowder filled the air once again, as the pair recognized the concrete hallway where they fought an army of lickers only half an hour prior. Claire stopped before him, as if recalling so much ambush earlier, and looked back at him, her blue eyes piercing through the darkness in front of Jack. "Maybe we should take it slow," she suggested, and he nodded in agreement. They followed to the corridor and hung right at the end of the hallway. Jack covered Claire's approach, eyeing the door with the morgue feeling and the tension rise as they moved away from it. It was getting to the point where every floor, every hallway, and every single room held a terrifying experience for them. He hoped that it meant that they were close to an escape. He hoped that this nightmare would soon end. Claire stopped at the armory door, and her body was blocked with whatever she was looking at. "What's this? We already have locked this thing up." It was a note from Leon. Claire's hands grasped the small paper that was attached to the armory door. Looks like he got into the armory somehow." She shot Jack a look of confusion. "How the hell was he able to get into the armory?" "Thought you said it was locked," she said. Jack nodded. It was. His eyes fell upon the Umbrella logo against the card reader. "Wonder if our friend Leon has any ties to Umbrella. How else will he be able to bypass Umbrella's security? Looks like he headed right for the car park and made a path for us to the sewer," Claire explained. Jack brushed the Umbrella brand card reader to his elbow. "How do you think he got in?" Claire shook her head, while fixated on the poorly scribbled note. "Claire, I locked this thing down before we left. There was no power for it to be open," Jack said. Claire's eyes flicked up back at him, with a brow wrinkled in confusion at him. "What doesn't matter?" "It's an Umbrella tech reader card. Without power or the key card, someone high up with the Umbrella would have access to it," Jack said. "Are you saying Leon might be involved with Umbrella?" Claire asked. "I'm not saying anything for sure. Maybe he is with someone, or someone affiliated with Umbrella opened it before he happened," Jack suggested, trying his best not to accuse the only survivor in the place. Claire seemed to think carefully about what he was saying. She seemed to take it seriously, to which it was more than he could ask for. After all, as much as they had been through together, he still didn't know anything about this girl he had only met a few hours ago. He assumed that she felt the same to an extent about him. Don't devalue what you've been through together. Does he mean to trust his gut more? For now, who knew what was going on in the station? For all they knew, perhaps the door and had preserved power, and he was being a hypochondriac. Regardless, we need to find Leon and get the hell out of here. He's obviously too found his way to the sewers. Maybe he's found a way out too? Jack nodded. He liked the idea sound of that. The sooner they left the station, behind the better. With that, Claire being tucked the note into her vest pocket and lifted her Browning to continue down the concrete hall, following the signs of the parking garage. They found a metal storm leading to the garage at the end of the hall, around a corner, without a thought. Claire had turned the knob and Jack led the way as she covered him. Jack felt relief washed over him as the fresh air of the parking garage gas stench hit his nostrils. The musty smell of the police station and the basement faded behind him as the door slammed behind them. The vague smell of fresh air there did so much sense, reminding him of they were fighting to escape. "I'll check the exit to the streets," Jack said, as he ran down through multiple rows of parking spots. Claire, meanwhile, stepped warily into the middle of the garage. She waited for a movement as he had found the only exit. "Damn it!" Jack yelled, as he slammed his fist against the shutter. He could barely see the lights from the streets, on top of the incline heading out of the station. The white moon shined down at him, reflecting his eyes. He never knew how much he missed it until he wondered if he'd be able to see it again. "It's pretty. Didn't think we'd get it to see it again tonight," Claire said quietly. Jack nodded quietly. "We'll make it out if we have to." "Don't make a promise that you can't keep, Jack," Claire said quietly. "Claire," he started. He looked over at him as his blue eyes were shifting as if trying to find the right words. "We're going to make it out of here, I promise." Claire smiled warily at him. He didn't blame her for doubting him. After all, they both came close to death twice already. With the gate being locked, meant that their journey had to continue. The power to the gate was long gone now, and the gate was locked from the outside. It made Jack wonder if their original intention was to lock down. "If we do make it out," her voice interrupted his thoughts suddenly, "I hope we see each other again, when things aren't like this." Jack was surprised to hear this by her. He didn't expect Claire to reach out for him. "I was hoping to see you when we make it out," he smiled back at her. Suddenly Claire's hand reached for his. Her soft fingers interlocked with his. She then took in a deep breath and blew it out again as if preparing herself mentally for the journey into the sewers. He looked over at her and squeezed her hand. "We got this," he reassured her. She nodded. "No, I was worried about you, actually." "There she is?" He nodded, laughing. Just then a guttural yell bellowed beneath them. Something awful, so human yet so monstrous. Jack and Claire spun in motion. Claire holstered her Browning and lifted the grenade launcher. Jack lifted the M4 to take in what lay beyond the sight. Before they stood a humanoid creature, hung over slightly. He appeared to be injured. At first, in the darkness into the parking garage, he had shambled into the light of the creature appeared to be half man and half bioweapon. "What the hell is that?" Claire yelled next to him. The creature had a sandy, light-colored hair on his human head. His gaze fixated down towards the concrete floor, and his left shoulder, one eye, blinked at them intermittently. A red, stringy claw hung from his shoulder, grasping a 2x4 plank of wood. The eye on his shoulder appeared to have grown bony spike from the tip of its shoulder. The man appeared to have an old white dress hanging from the tatters of the torso. Flipped the badge and smacked against the coat ripped over his left pedicle, showing his shredded skin with an exposed muscle chest. From what they could see, his legs were intact, and most of the human trait about him. He wore a pair of dark blue jeans with brown loafers. As the man stepped down towards them, Jack quit waiting for the inevitable, pulled the trigger on his M4. Neither of them had any idea what the thing was, but it wasn't going to stop them from escaping. Claire's ears rang loudly as Jack's M4 blasted round after round into the beast's chest. She had tried to fight the reflex of covering her ears. The mini-sonic booms of the force from the muzzle pounded in her chest. Claire had lifted the grenade launcher once more. She turned her head towards Jack, who was still squinting down from his sights as the humanoid figure stepped forward. Jack moved! One eye caught the sight of her lifting the grenade launcher, and he started to dart to the side, taking cover behind the station wagon on the far corner of the side of the ticket booth. Claire pulled the trigger on the grenade launcher, sending a 4mm grenade directly at the creature. The monster staggered backwards from the impact. The pulse of the explosion knocked Claire back to the steel gate behind her. "Claire!" Jack shouted after her. His voice was followed by a steady repetition of the booming gunfire. Claire had led against the steel gate. She shook her head as if trying to shake the shell shock from the explosion. Claire came scrambling into the opposite direction. She scurried over to the hood of the small truck and disappeared onto the side. The grenade launcher clanged to the concrete beside her, the sling being the only thing keeping it at her side. The monster let out another blood-curdling yell. The monster started for Claire, behind the truck, his anger fixated on her as he peeked over the hood to see him coming for her. He had stumbled on slamming his 2x4 onto the windshield, sending shattered glass in all directions. It screamed as Claire crouched low and raced back to the truck bed. "Hey, asswipe!" Jack called from behind the monstrosity. The thing turned to face him. Jack aimed for the Desert Eagle, that of his pulsating eye blinking back at him. It stared for him in the admittedly predictable fashion. Despite the monster's fury, it lurched forward and stumbled, reaching for him across the garage. Jack's eyes caught Claire darting into the darkness back behind towards the police station. He squeezed the trigger, sending a .50 caliber round straight into the eye on the chest. It blinked furiously, pus and blood pouring from behind under its eyelid. Jack was so shocked to find it still in place. Just then the mutant found, and its speed, reaching for him and smacking him with the 2x4, sending Jack sprawling across the smooth pavement. Jack scurried to his feet and hurried for the Desert Eagle. He had lost his grip during the middle of the garage. The monster started for him again, pulled the M4 back up, and was finally firing wildly. Jack couldn't believe the amount of damage he was dealing. He could only hardly make it flinch. It seemed so unreal that something so grotesque could take all this abuse. The only thing that it seemed to affect him, sort of, was the Desert Eagle rounds. Those weren't exactly easy to come by. The thing adjusted to the stance and raced after him again. This time Jack was ready and drove to one behind a SWAT van nearby an old metal door. He had considered racing for the door and making a run for it. This thing wasn't exactly nimble. Maybe he could outrun it? Jack pulled himself upwards, both hands, planted on the door to pull himself up. As he did, he spotted Claire's slender shadow ducking behind the police cruisers. She was working on some kind of plan. If that's the case, then get your ass up and cover her. Jack looked over at the Desert Eagle, still in the middle of the car park. He would have had to let it be for now. The monster was too close for comfort. If he was going to fight this thing off, he would have to do it with something smaller. He scurried to his feet and found a cover on the side of the SWAT van as the monster continued for him. Jack couldn't help but feel the fear rise in his chest at the thought of this thing, what it would do for him when it got a hold of him. It let out another frustrated yell. Jack peered around the corner to check the progress. That's when he saw it. An umbrella badge plane was hanging dangling from its torn chest pocket. He recognized that card anywhere. Type in the fancy bold black stamped letters with his umbrella's familiar and red-white logo reflecting the back of him. He's Umbrella, William Birkin, Jack muttered to himself. The station's locked up tight. How the hell did he get in here? Unless there were several labs in the city, he only knew of 3. There was a hospital just downtown hiding right in the plain sight. And where was the other one? Somewhere in the Arcade Mountains. That's all I know. Rumor had it, though, in that case, his lab had gone up in flames due to an accidental explosion. He was only the security. Then, of course, he wasn't so exactly told in the details. It was briefly mentioned in one of their monthly security reports, so that they could use the information to prevent it from happening again as security agents. One thing being in Raccoon City Hospital, and one destroyed, and that did mean another inside the police station? He shook it off at the head of the thought of it. After all, he had just explored most of the police station above ground. Wasn't a hint of lab, a part of it from the infirmary. What if it's like this on the hive on the west coast of Washington State? The one that is completely underground. Jack shook his head and shoulders at the M4. He pulled the handgun from his holster and turned around the SWAT van. Hugging the hood tight as he did so, he peered down at the sights, lining up the back of the white sights with the front dot where the monster's was moments before. Nothing. There was a monster only stood moments before. There was nothing. Just then, something slapped his shoulders. Jack reached down to touch his upper arm, and his hand came away wet with blood and pus. Ugh! Jack turned his head to see a disfigured man's face looking down on him. His short blonde hair hung over him. It breathed and groaned heavily, readying to jump. His face was stretching into a painful wince, lacking in all emotion as it stared down upon him. Jack threw himself to the ground onto his back, pointed his gun upwards. He pulled the trigger as fast as he could, sending a few rounds high and connecting as he descended into flat onto his back. "Claire, where are you?" The beast leapt down from on top of the SWAT van. Jack kicked away and scrambled, firing 2 more rounds. The bullets slapped against the monster's snooty chest. "Shit," Jack muttered as he was fired again. The side of the handgun racked back as it went dry. Just then a siren wailed over, shaking voice, and cut him off the growls before the monster before him. "Jack, move!" Claire called out. Jack looked up behind him, planting his hands on the ground as he turned around to see Claire hanging her head out of the police cruiser across from the parking garage where they had all entered. She revved the engine in 2 strokes. The car raced forward towards at them. Jack rolled onto his side out of the way. With seconds to spare, the police cruiser sped past him. The car smashed up, crumpling the hood against the flesh of the monster, sending him careening down to the SWAT van. "Claire!" Jack shouted as the car came to a sudden stop, the black bumper jumping upwards and dropping down in response to the impact. The monster fell flat onto the hood, pinned between the car and the truck. It lay still, not breathing. No movement. Jack got up and sprinted to the driver's side, leaping towards the trunk as he did so. Jack pulled open the door. Claire shook to her head inside. A small gash was shown across the forehead. "You okay?" he asked. She blinked a few times. "Better now that the thing isn't moving. Come on now, let's go before it wakes up." Jack pulled her arm. She jogged after him, following him to a nearby SWAT van. Jack then threw the door closed behind them, leaving the monster alone in the garage, dead, hopefully.